Good morning. Welcome to the public meeting of May 8th, 2020. The New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. I will call the roll. Chair Carroll.
Here.
Commissioner Bland. Commissioner Devonshire.
Here.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Here.
Commissioner Shamir Barron. Commissioner Shamir Barron. Okay, you were muted. Can you just repeat that again?
Here.
Okay. Commissioner Holford Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Chapin.
Here.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Here.
Commissioner Chen.
Yeah.
Sorry, I misplaced my sign-up sheet. Give me one more moment. I apologize. Commissioner Goldblum.
Here.
And Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
Okay, all set.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to today's public meeting. Today's public meeting was added to the Commission's calendar in order to address a backlog of applications that resulted when 2 public hearings and meetings were canceled in March as a result of the coronavirus. And so we appreciate everyone's flexibility in accommodating this public meeting. And so I just wanted to say a few words about the purpose of today's meeting. This is a public meeting. It is not a public hearing. Applications on public meeting agendas that have all had applications that are on public meeting agendas have all had a public hearing already. And during that public hearing, the commissioners carefully considered the applicant's presentations, the public testimony, and didn't take an action. Instead, the commission asked the applicants to return with a revised plan that addresses concerns they raised at the hearing after considering all of the testimony. Public meetings provide an opportunity for the public to observe the commissioners as they consider a revised proposal. Today's public meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public can follow along in real time. While the public cannot testify today because the hearing is closed, the Commission posts all revised presentations calendared for public meetings on our website and accepts written comments into the record if they are received prior to the meeting, and they are distributed to the commissioners. We have received written comments for several of the items on the agenda today, and those have all been forwarded to you, commissioners. In addition, today we will be reviewing 2 applications for advisory reports in Central Park. And those are items that are not eligible for a staff level approval, but do not significantly affect the original landscape design. And under a longstanding protocol, those advisory applications for work in scenic landmarks are reviewed at a public meeting and will be followed by a public hearing at the Public Design Commission, who has binding jurisdiction. So with that explanation, I will now turn it over to our Director of Preservation, Corey Harala, to begin the meeting. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to start today's Preservation Department agenda with public meeting item number 1, LPC 20-01939, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 610, Lot 53, 21 Greenwich Avenue in the Greenwich Village Historic District, a Greek Revival style house built in 1841. The application is to demolish a 1-story extension and construct a new building, stair and elevator bulkheads, install rooftop mechanical equipment, construct a rooftop addition, and modify an opening at the ground floor. This was last presented at the public hearing of October 8th, 2019, and no action was taken at that time. I'll give a brief summary of the concerns and issues raised by the commissioners. There was a consensus of support for demolishing the 1-story extension and building a new structure in its place. Many commissioners were concerned that the new structure was trying to be both an addition to the historic building and a new infill building in the streetscape, and this led to questions about separation and appropriate scale. Some commissioners also expressed concern about the treatment of the historic rear facade at the intersection with the new structure. Regarding design, the commissioners thought the glassy facade did not relate well to the building or the streetscape and suggested that more masonry be used. And finally, most commissioners were concerned about the level of visibility for the rooftop addition. So with that, the applicant team is here and will now present their response to those comments.
Okay, commissioners, can we have a motion to open the public meeting, the proceedings, so the applicant may speak?
So move.
And can we have a second?
Second.
All in
Second.
favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so please go ahead.
Terrific. Thank you. This is Cass Stackelberg of Higgins, Quaisbarth and Partners with my colleague Julie Rosen from our office, as well as George Schieferdecker and Joe Hogan from BKSK Architects. First off, I do want to sort of reiterate what Chair Carroll just said in terms of appreciation from the applicant side to you all, both the staff and the commissioners, for holding today's hearing. It's amazing and wonderful that we're able to continue this work together, and we just want to, or I just want to express the appreciation of those from the applicants. As Corey described, we brought forward a project to you all back in October, which feels like a lifetime ago, for a series of work at the corner of 10th Street and Greenwich Avenue in the Greenwich Village Historic District. The slide that's up now shows our revised proposal. The image on the left, the image on the right is an existing photo, and there's a site plan up in the corner, which just indicates the location on the southwest corner of Greenwich Avenue and 10th Street. There are three component parts to the project. One is the restoration of the three-story Greek Revival building on the corner, the addition of a small studio on the roof, and then the third component involved demolition of a one-story extension and construction of a five-story as-of-right residential building. As you heard, there were comments about the visibility of the rooftop addition. There were comments about the scale and relationship between the new building and the historic building. And there was general acceptance for the demolition of the one-story extension. I'll take you through a little bit of the background, and George will share with you the revised design. Joe Hogan is advancing slides, so you'll hear me saying next as we go through this. And Joe, I'm ready for the next one. So just quickly, a few images of the existing building on the corner. As I said, a three-story Greek Revival row house with a really fascinating stepped parapet across the top of the 10th Street elevation. The image in the middle of the back of the building shows the one-story extension, which has been changed multiple times, beginning as early as the first decades of the 20th century, and then with under commission review, various storefronts through the last half of the 20th century. Mechanical equipment and ductwork running up the back of the historic building, which at the time of the start of the project has been coated in an asphalt roofing cement. And then a long view looking west along 10th Street toward the Greenwich Avenue facade. Next. Some detailed photos of the facade. As I mentioned, there's a comprehensive restoration program, new wood windows, repairing and restoring the wood cornice. The photo on the upper right shows an interesting detail with bluestone, granite, and sandstone lintels, which of course will be retained, so for an unusual treatment. Then across the ground floor, a restoration project for a new wood storefront, stripping the paint off of the granite piers. And then the photo on the lower right just indicates this low door on the far right edge of the 10th Street elevation, which we propose to raise up to match the height of the adjacent doorway. Next slide. We shared with you some context images to address the addition of the studio addition on the corner building. As you all probably know, Greenwich Village has a long history of studio additions and enlargements for these row house scale properties in a variety of configurations, dormer windows, studio and skylights, and then more articulated as sort of one-story additions like the photos on the top middle and top right. So we've looked to these images as sort of guidance and precedent for the scale and visibility of our addition. Next slide. We also looked at the way these corner buildings have been treated over time. And what's been interesting in our research is there historically were a number of 3- and 4-story buildings built on corner lots in the district with open rear yards. And over time, many of those, in fact, actually most of those have been infilled. So this is an image of a building with a 4-story extension adjacent to a 3-story corner building. All of the building has been painted, so it's difficult to see those additions, but clearly from the map data, it's clear that the addition or the extension at 4 stories was built up at the end of the 19th century. The next slide. Closer to the project site, this is 1 block north on the corner of Charles and Greenwich Avenue. 39 Greenwich Avenue, another sort of transformation with a historic 4-story Greek Revival building, part of a long row fronting onto Greenwich Avenue with an open rear yard, which by the end of the 19th century had a 5-story extension. And what's interesting, about this project or this site is how when the extension was added in the rear yard, there was a complete sort of transformation of the expression, the architectural style of the building. It sort of went from simple Greek Revival with this crenellated parapet to something that was more akin to sort of a medieval treatment. So we obviously have a different approach. We think it's important to create a distinction between the infill building that we're proposing at the back of the building from the historic building. Next slide. We shared with you also a series of images of commission-approved infill buildings throughout the district, which in most cases, 3 of 4 of these included demolition of 1- and 2-story structures, garage buildings, theaters, or residences. And really, we share these with you just to see the range of materiality, masonry, metals, glass, but also to share with you the way, particularly the fenestration is handled, some sort of small scale akin to the adjacent properties, others with much larger scale window openings across the facades. Next slide. And then just returning back to our project. So on the left is the image, an image from our October presentation showing our original proposal, and on the right, our revised proposal, addressing a few things. One, obviously the visibility of the addition and minimizing that, as you'll see in the sightline studies. But I think more significantly, we've studied the materiality of the new building, the addition, and also the relationship to the historic building at 21 and to the neighbors. And with these revisions, we think we've arrived at an appropriate infill for the district. George?
Am I unmuted at this point?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. My name is George Schieferdecker, and I'm with BKSK Architects. I'd just like to point out that Harry Kendall from BKSK is also on the call, and hopefully at the end of this, we can unmute him and ask him to comment to see whether he has anything else to say. The 4 categories of comments that we heard in response to the original proposal for this project were, as Corey has mentioned, scale, that we should address the appropriateness of the proposed scale of our project, what we dubbed separation, that there should be, and there was a distinct preference for having the infill read separately from the rooftop addition to the historic building, materiality, that the commissioners had a distinct preference for a more masonry in the design of the infill section. I think these first 3 comments are often intertwined. Materiality and lack of separation, for instance, can have a bearing on the perception of scale. In our last presentation, that relationship was highlighted by the comment by one commissioner who felt that the scale of our infill building would likely be acceptable if its materiality was altered. So we have made a number of changes to the design in that regard. In the place of our continuous 5-story metal and glass screen of the previous proposal, we have proposed a metal and glass bay window on floors 2, 3, and 4, with some minor detailing tying it to the ground level. In place of the predominantly metal language of the previous proposal, which tied into the metal language of the addition on the historic section and included the sidewall of the infill building, the bay window of the revised design emerges from a predominantly masonry mass and includes a brick sidewall in a more contextual lot line typology. The glass corner of the previous scheme, which surrounded a stairwell and hovered over the historic section, has been eliminated, and the stair pushed back into the body of the infill so that the diminutive volume of the historic portion can be read more clearly and unambiguously. The fourth comment had to do with the visibility of the roof, top addition on the historic portion of the project, and we believe we have addressed that as well. Joe, could I get the next one? So I'll take each category of comments individually. So scale first. At the top of the sheet is the previous proposal, and at the bottom, the current proposal. The overall height of the infill has not changed. We believe that the 5-story scale is entirely appropriate within the streetscape of 10th Street as well as Greenwich Avenue. On 10th Street, the predominant scales of the village are evident. There are 3- and 4-story townhouses and 5- and 6-story tenement buildings, and our project fits well within that scale range. In addition, with a bay window reading at 4 stories, our revised design effectively mediates between the scale of the 3-story historic portion and the 4- and 5-story heights of the buildings on the street. It becomes a kind of inventory of the building scales on its side of the street, and it'll become more evident as we go through this presentation, what I'm talking about here. Can I get the next slide? On Greenwich Avenue, the existing scale varies widely, and our project is clearly well within the existing scale, and the challenge becomes to maintain the diminutive scale of the historic portion in the whole reading of our project. Next slide. The scale of the buildings on the other side of 10th Street is emblematic of the wide range of scales surrounding the site. 3- and 4-story townhouse, 6-story tenements in this case, and modern 12-, 14-story buildings. And I trust it is obvious that our proposal, which is overlaid on our neighbor across the street, fits within those scales and is appropriate. I would submit that what needs to be studied as much as the relevance of the scale of our project within the context is the scale of the project within itself, how the various components of the infill and the historic relate to each other. Next, please. So what Joe's going to do is quickly flip between one image and another to indicate some of the things that we're talking about and that the changes have wrought. By flipping between the next 2 slides, we can sense the changes made to the design and their impact on the scale of the building relative to its immediate surroundings and between the historic portion and the infill portion of the design. The basic mass of the building is set further back, and the appearance of height is lessened. The addition of the lower bay window modulates between the historic portion and the scale of neighboring buildings, and the removal of the overhanging metal and glass stair enclosure allows the historic volume to be more clearly articulated. Also, if we can take for a moment and take a look at the rooftop addition as well. We're going to talk about visibility a little bit later, but I think it's also clear in this flipping back and forth, the changes we have made make that less apparent from the street. Next slide. So I wanted to move on to materiality and separation with a brief preamble. I think ornamental and metal and utilitarian metal on the front face of buildings is ubiquitous in the village. It takes the form of railings, fire escapes, and balconies. The presence of bay windows of a contrasting material to their backgrounds is commonplace. The presence of a contemporary vocabulary is also present, very much in keeping with the eclecticism of the village. And the occurrence of a bay window modulating between street planes can also be seen. So our bay window fits into all of these precedents and takes a cue from each one. Next slide, please. On the left is our previous proposal, on the right is our current design from a different angle now. As before, the units are full floor on 2 and 3, extending from the infill section to the historic section, and a duplex apartment is on the top 2 floors. The bay window occupies the right 2/3 of the facade of the infill in order to create what we call a reveal or indent between the infill and the historic portion. This reveal leaves the original diminutive volume of the historic portion clearly articulated by recalling its original rear wall and exposing its rear corner. This has always been a primary intention of our design, and we think the changes do it better than the original proposal by setting back continuously and removing the overhanging glass stair volume as I indicated before. The metal and glass screen of the former proposal has been changed to the bay window, which is set into a slot of space in a now predominantly brick mass. The metal contemporary cornice element is set back from the street wall. The next slide, please. At that indent, the brick of the historic section returns for a height of about 10 feet in the current design and then becomes a tight bar grill louver that expresses the planar quality of the facade on 10th Street. The historic facade on 10th Street has always been of interest to us as an unusual expression with its very prominently stepped parapet. In some of the historic photos, that step facade, appears to extend up above the rear wall, and the rear wall is defined differently, either by a parging or simply a shadow line, and the result is an expression of the side wall as a simple plane of brick. In other historic photos, the middle one in particular, the emphasis is on the return of the brick on the rear wall. We have chosen to express both conditions at the corner of the historic portion. Next. The bay window of the facade is the canopy for the entrance at the first floor, an extension of the living room of the units on the second and third floors, an extension of a bedroom on the fourth floor, and a balcony off of the master bedroom on the top floor. On the second, third, and fourth floors, the glass section to the left of the middle is a door that opens inward, and an acid-etched railing sits outboard by about 3 or 4 inches and carries over to the left edge of the bay. The right side of the bay is floor-to-ceiling glass at the second and third floors, an acid edge to a sill level with vertical fins at the fourth floor for a great degree of privacy, where the bay is part of a bedroom. On the back wall at the very top floor, there are 2 glass panels left and right and a solid spandrel panel in the middle. The bay appears to be pulled out of the masonry mass of the building, and the masonry return at the bay only is metal and matches the profile of the surround at the leading edge of the bay. That framework at the front of the bay extends to within a few inches of the ground to create an entry zone. And the bay also pulls back from a brick fin wall at its western or right edge so that it is clearly a 3-sided glass box with space to either side that puts anyone standing in the bay fully outside of the main mass of the building. Next. So switching to visibility, and I'm going to come back to materiality to describe the actual materials. But I wanted to give a complete explanation of the new volume of the proposal. The rooftop addition of the previous proposal shown here had a peaked roof, a glass wall facing the street, and was 14 feet 9 inches from the Greenwich Avenue front. Next. The current proposal flattens the roof, takes away the glass expression on the street frontage in order to make it simpler, and most importantly, sets the addition back an additional 3 feet 6 inches for a total of 18 feet 3 inches from the Greenwich Avenue frontage, as requested in the commissioner's comments to set it back further on the Greenwich Avenue side. The mechanical appurtenances and the elevator bulkhead remain almost out of view from the street as in the previous proposal. The current proposal also makes the side of the infill portion out of brick and substantially reduces the amount of glass within it. The previous proposal had turned the corner with glass and metal and opened up the infill portion to the rooftop addition. The current proposal creates the equivalent of a masonry lot line condition with limited openings. The move is a response to preference for more brick on the infill and more of a separation of the historic from the infill so that the infill reads more akin to a separate building than an addition. Next. The brick of the infill portion was chosen to be deliberately at variance with the existing brick of the historic portion. It is a deep red-brown molded brick. The metal work of the bay is a charcoal gray toned metal with a substantial fin expression at the bay window so that it has a similarity to the thinness of steel. The side of the roof top addition is a copper that is meant to be patinated to a deep bronze tone. And while the previous proposal sought to unify the rooftop addition to the infill, the current proposal emphasizes separation between the two materially as well as volumetrically. The only nod to the buildings being tied together in plan is a repetition of the patinated bronze toned copper of the addition at the side of the entry to the residential portion of the building. The other materials represented on this page are the granite at the base of the building and at the planter by the entry, the acid etched glass at railings and certain glass surfaces, and the metal panels, and the metal panel of the bulkheads. Next. So following other views of current and previous, from the south on Greenwich Avenue, the rooftop addition is less in evidence in the current scheme as it has been set back further. Next. From the east, the rooftop addition appears lower because it is set back further. The current proposal also shows its brick lot line wall. Next. From the north on Greenwich Avenue, the rooftop addition of the current proposal recedes further back. Next. From the west along 10th Street, the infill appears lower because the metal 5-story metal and glass screen of the previous proposal has been eliminated and the 4-story bay window is what is visible. This also is the view that reveals the volume of the historic section as one gets closer. Next. In conclusion, what we have done with our current revisions is address the commissioner comments about scale by breaking up the volumes of the facade and reducing the impression of height by setting back the main volume of the infill while maintaining the 5-story height of the infill, which we feel is well within the scale of the context. Separation and materiality by preferencing the reading of the infill as a separate building with a lot line condition, giving it a predominantly masonry appearance with a different tone brick from the historic and allowing the volume of the historic portion to assert itself. And 3, decreasing the visibility of the rooftop addition by increasing its setback from Greenwich Avenue and simplifying its form and material expression. Next. So thank you. We have an appendix that contains some additional materials that may or may not be relevant to any further discussion. We can access them if we need to. Thank you again.
Thank you. Commissioners, do we have any questions at this time? Do you want to raise your hand and let me know if we have any questions? Commissioner Goldblum, please go ahead.
Hi. So can you just go back to the plan view of the balcony detail? I just want to understand your intention with the relationship between the balcony element and the townhouse to the right, the west. Yeah. So it's set back a little bit from the townhouse to the west, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So,
As I'm looking at it now, I realize that there's one slight mistake in that plan and that the brick fin wall to the west appears to continue up, but it does not go up the full height of the building. It only continues to the level of the balcony.
right. This question occurred to me now. It didn't in a previous scheme because the scheme is quite a bit more contextually and intending to be contextual in a more, I guess, traditional way. What set for you the plane of the brick in your proposal? Where did that plane come from?
The plane of the brick was both set back so we would get a kind of a dimension that allowed the corner of the historic building to read, that the sort of balcony and bay window depth appeared reasonable, not overly sized, but enough to be sufficient expression. So I think it's those dimensions that essentially set that back, those thoughts.
Okay. And last question, your rooftop addition, looking at it in light of many other rooftop additions, is relatively opaque on the 10th Street side. Explain to us why you made that decision and why that's a good thing.
Well, we wanted to make it a little bit more, let's just say a little simpler. On the one hand, on the other hand, we realized that the building across the street was not, in fact, our best view. It's a white brick 50s building. It's not, in our mind, of the character that is most of interest to anybody living here. So the top addition, rooftop addition, opens almost entirely to its own terrace, and then the view of the Jefferson Market, which is a fantastic view. And that is a glass wall that is certainly sufficient for any substantial space to get light and air. So what we've done is sort of mix the vocabulary a little bit. We have kind of almost a bulkhead type aesthetic on the street side and studio edition type aesthetic on Greenwich Avenue.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, Commissioner Jefferson.
Yes, I have two questions. And one of them, could you explain to me the corner, if you go to infill facade, what you have on the screen now, the corner, it's at the lower level, the volume of the brick turns in to the new infill, correct? And then then there's a setback and an edge condition. Am I reading that correct?
Yes, you are.
Right, you see, right. Now the setback condition, what material is that? Brick, or is it the setback piece? What is that material?
It's a continuous louver, essentially. It has, and when I say louver, I want to make clear that a lot of standard mechanical louvers are quite ugly. We would intend this to be a closely spaced bar grill type louver. It does have mechanical space behind it that services the unit. And what we were doing here was very deliberately articulating what we see in many of the historic photos, which is that stepped facade on the street reads as a plane as often as it does as a brick volume. So we've both articulated that planar reading on the upper floors with this reveal, and at the lower level, the sense that the rear wall of the existing historic building is also evident.
I understand. I think it's a good idea. I was just wondering, why not just make a simple edge condition? Because the overlap is quite nice. I mean, the two volumes are overlapping, which is, does that mean that you're cutting the existing? Well, no, you're removing the back wall. So it's just an overlapping condition. Got that.
Yeah.
The other issue is on the right-hand side, this wall that goes up. Why not extend it all the way up? Why just stop it where you're stopping it now? Because it seems arbitrary there to me somehow. I mean,
Well,
what's the idea behind stopping it there? Yeah.
Well, you hit upon one of those things that gets debated endlessly in our office. I think that in the previous proposal it did, and that was because the front plane of the building's expression extended all the way up. Now we feel that the front plane expression does not extend all the way up, and that this particular wall should match it. Essentially, we did a number of studies looking at it both ways, and our feeling was that this looked more appropriate.
Okay, and finally, if you go to your elevation, south elevation,
Well, we literally don't have a south elevation. We have an east elevation.
there's two.
The
Yeah,
front-
you did a lower one. You had two. You had an elevation looking south that showed your building with the block, the whole block.
Yeah, you're talking about the
showing the corner
perspective
building.
image from the corner.
It's a line elevation that you drew.
A block
And the buildings
elevation,
were in
I
white.
think
Oh, a block
Yeah.
elevation?
this is it.
There it is. Yeah.
Okay.
And the question there, I think this is really much improved. I was just feeling you have a volume in the corner, you have in the volume infill. The connection on the roof seems to belong to neither. You have A, B, and C, and I'm wondering why the penthouse doesn't relate to the historic building more precisely. So you have volume A and volume B. And what's the idea of the overlap that we see in the elevation? You see the ambiguity between, it becomes a third element, if you will.
Well, I think that many rooftop additions in the village end up being either studio or bulkhead-like, and generally, or often of a slightly different quality as the main mass. I think what we tried to do essentially was when we look at a head-on elevation, obviously we see a lot more of it than we would when we're looking from the street. In the street views, we simply wanted to make it discrete, set back. And then we liked the notion that it had a very subtle relation to the new proposal and the new design by taking that material and bringing it down close to the entry, something that perhaps the street observer might not necessarily notice, but certainly our residents would get a sense of as they grew to understand their building. I think the main perception from the street would be of the historic building, its bay window, which has volume and mass to it, and the brick infill that the bay window comes out from. And those are really the three elements that I think create the overall impression of our building on the street.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lutfi, did you have a question?
Did, but I think it was answered.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so this is an application where we did receive some letters which have been forwarded to the commissioners. And Rich, maybe you could just note for the record whom we received letters from.
Sure. We received letters on this from 3 nearby residents. Just give me 1 second as I pull it up. This came from a Robin Fischer in opposition. Another letter has come from a Deborah Sherman in opposition, and then a final letter in opposition from a Mark Luck.
Okay. And I believe we also received a letter from Village Preservation that was forwarded to the commissioners as well.
Mhm.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, I think we can move to our discussion. So one last chance for questions. I'm looking for hands raised and not seeing any. Let's move into our discussion. Commissioner Goldblum, would you like to start this one? And I think just to give you some context, this is, again, we have to talk about the demolition of the existing building and which is a one-story extension, and then the design of the new construction. And, as Corey said, the last time we saw this, the commission in concept was comfortable with the demolition of the extension and replacing it with an infill building, but there were concerns about the expression of the new building and whether it was reading as an extension to the corner building, the historic building, or as a new building. And so that was something that the commissioners discussed a lot. And as a addition to the corner building, also the commissioners felt that it was too tall or its height was out of character. There were also some concerns about the glass and the visibility of the rooftop addition on the corner building, and in particular that you could see that the rooftop addition connected to the taller portion which gave the feeling that the new construction was sort of subsuming the corner building. So the response today has been to separate the two in expression. And so in reviewing this application, I think that the commission can consider the 4-story portion as a new building and consider the height and massing, the plane of the facade, and the design and materials as you would with a new building in a historic district. And the rooftop addition, one could also consider that as in the context of rooftop additions that existed historically on buildings in this district, as well as commission approved additions. So while it's one whole project, I think, you know, the commission can, since we've sort of steered them in the direction to separate them or distinguish them in expression, one could think about it that way in your comments. So with that, Commissioner Goldblum, will you lead this discussion? Let me see, where are you? Okay. Oh,
We're unmuting each other.
I know.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Okay. I think that I remember the initial conversation about the first version of the building as being a very spirited and complex conversation provoked by a spirited and complex design. I think this design is much more toned down and simplified and kind of takes a step back. I think that the much about the resulting change is positive. I think that the quote unquote new building has a much less aggressive quality relative to its context. I think that it's generally appropriate. I think it's first of all appropriate, as it was last time, to take down the existing building. I share Everardo's concern or kind of question about the relationship between the rooftop addition on the existing building and the building below it. It does have the feeling of being something that's trying to make this something that kind of either out of left field, like it is I do see the relationship with the copper panel at the entry in this rendering, but I don't think that's something that most folks will generally perceive. And I think that kind of schematically, it does belong to the existing building, and as such, I think its expression could reflect that better, I think. But that's something that could be done with staff. I think that the reduction in the volume of the rooftop addition is a positive that reduces visibility. I have questions about that brick separating wall that Everardo mentioned. It strikes me that its height is related. It's a kind of a typical end wall cap whose purpose, I think, kind of dies where the parapet of the neighboring building ends. I don't see how visually it doesn't seem to relate to the composition of the existing building, and it does affect the silhouette of the building against the sky. So I guess I would ask them to work with staff to explore that. And I know that George had mentioned that they had done studies on it, and I think that if staff would look at it with them, I trust whatever they would come up with. I think that the treatment of the west side wall of the existing building is appropriate and an improvement. It's funny. The one thing that I'm curious about, and I don't think it makes it inappropriate, but it certainly gives me a kind of a, I don't really know what to do with it kind of response. When the building was glass and metal, it was very much trying to be its own thing, a very modern, capital M modern intrusion into the district. And so a lot of the kind of rules that are associated with traditional infill buildings were loosened up because that's the way that system works, for better or for worse. The changing of the mass to brick, for me, makes it more traditional and makes it more acceptable, generally speaking. But the position of that main facade as being set back to such a degree, it's kind of curious. It's kind of you wouldn't expect a masonry plane at that location relative to the street wall in a contextually sensitive building. So the choice to make the brick contextual plane so far set back is curious. I don't think it's bad. I think it's kind of okay. I don't think it makes it inappropriate. I just find it curious, and I wonder if others have thoughts about it, and I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. I guess just thinking about that, for me, the benefit of setting the plane back is that you do get to see a return of the rear wall on the corner building, which allows that building to read as its own building, and in some ways could be responsive or to the row house facades that are typically set back, although the brick fin here clearly separates this facade from the adjacent row house facade, but I think the two do align.
Well, I think in response to that, I don't disagree with you, but in a funny way, what they've done, and again, I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think it's a curious thing. The kind of new modern metal expression is the one that's creating the contextual relationship with the facade, the street wall, whereas the traditional brick material is the one that's set back. The non-contextual location, the reveal, the form of the building is what makes that reveal possible and makes the exposing of that corner possible, which is a very good thing. But you could imagine the materials being reversed, right? That the front wall of the balcony being masonry and the set back wall being the glass, it would have a very different relationship with the street wall. And I don't mean to suggest that they should consider doing it. I just found it kind of curious, and I'm not sure if I think it's the right choice or not, but I certainly think that what's here is appropriate. It's just interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thank you, Diana. Where are you?
Okay. I find that most of the changes have been responsive to the commissioner's prior concerns. I can approve the demolition and the construction of the new building. And I think the only thing that gives me concern at this point is that the rooftop addition, the materiality, appears to kind of call attention to itself, the copper. Maybe the rendering, but I think the rendering is actually accurate in its intent. And I think another material should be used for the rooftop. I actually think that, they've drawn it back and the visibility is lower and against the background. I think that's acceptable. So my main concern at this point is the materiality of the rooftop addition.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Holford-Smith.
Oh, yes, thank you. I think that the applicant has done a really good job of addressing our comments, and I think the building is much more contextual now. I really appreciate Commissioner Goldblum's comments about the location of the brick in relationship to the bay. And I think it's very interesting that yeah, maybe it would be more expected to put the brick in the front plane, but I don't find that what they've done is inappropriate. But I agree, it is kind of curious. I do also agree that the copper cladding on the rooftop bulkhead draws too much attention to that structure, and maybe it could be toned down to match the storefronts on the existing building. Something, maybe just a recessive. But otherwise, I think that the other changes are good. Actually, the one other thing that was commented on was that the brick end wall and the height at which it ends, which I do think seems arbitrary, and I'm not sure that if it should be higher or lower, but I think that could be studied with staff as well. That's it.
Okay, sorry, Anne, can you just repeat that last sentence?
The brick thin wall
The
at the
brick
end.
fin? Okay,
It's
that's
at
what I
the
thought
height of
was.
it ends sort of at an arbitrary location.
Yeah,
It doesn't align with the adjacent building, and it doesn't form a parapet wall to the new infill building. So I think that's something that could be studied further.
okay, thank you. All right, and Commissioner Gustafson.
I agree with the comments that the commissioners have made. I find the demolition to be appropriate. I think they were very responsive to our issues with materiality and visibility and separation. I'm very happy that they got rid of that sort of concept of having the front of the new building hovering over the existing building. I'm never much of a fan of hovering, and not particularly in this case either. I think the use of the copper on the rooftop addition is an issue for me. It seems, if you look in this particular slide, you can see that it tends to mask the stepped cornice, which we've talked so much about. So I do think they need to work on the materiality of that addition. That's it.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Jefferson.
It's much improved. They did something that I find fascinating. They took a small scale corner building by overlapping it with the infill building. The corner building becomes dominant. It's quite powerful at the corner. It looks very handsome. It's fine. The demolition of the building, existing building, it's okay. The only issue is that that wall on the west, and I'm wondering if they lowered it somewhat or worked it out. But I think they did a good job. I think it's fine.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Lutfi.
I agree with the comments that my fellow commissioners have made. I think this is a really positive step forward. And, a couple of things. I completely agree about the materiality of the building. I like the masonry aspect of it, and the fact that the brick is darker than the brick of the corner building. And because of that, I thought about what Commissioner Goldblum and others have said. I thought maybe the masonry could have come forward, but I think it's fine that it's recessed, because it reduces the feel of the mass of the building. So although the building is the same size as the original proposal, it doesn't feel quite as hefty. I do agree about the copper on the rooftop addition, and feel that the materiality should somehow work better with that building, because I want to also concur that I don't think that people are going to recognize the connection between the copper at street level. And I also agree that the brick on the end wall should be adjusted in some way because it seems kind of awkward. And a minor detail here, I think the rhythm in terms of the height with the rest of the block works, and of course the demolition of the building is fine. And just a minor thing is that those planters at the base of the building, I'm not sure of what that materiality is, but I feel as though it maybe should be something that appears very solid. Maybe that should be copper, maybe it should be black, so that it sort of blends with that, what you see as you're approaching the building when you walk down the block or enter it. But I think it's, I appreciate the responsiveness by the applicants, and I can support this.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, I agree with the fellow commissioner's comments. I think as compared to the previous scheme, this is much improved. I think using the brick as a contextual background material is much more appropriate in this instance. I do question the height. I think that some of the comments before about the relative, in context to the surrounding buildings, that seems to be arbitrary, whether it could be bring slightly lower. I do agree with the comments that with the chair's comment, especially about that in this case, the applicant had two choices. One is to go straight up the front plano facade, but I think by setting it back slightly creates a separation, a delineation, rather than this massive overscale, unless you want to relate it to the other eastern end corner, eastern end building. Overall, I have no problem with it. I think it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Devonshire.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything my colleagues have said. I think this revised design no longer screams for attention, taking attention away from the corner building anymore. It's much calmer. I too have issues with the copper on the roof of the existing building. It seems to relate more to the infill building. I'm okay with the demolition. And if I have to vote on the fin wall, I would say it needs to go down to the height of the parapet of the adjoining building.
Okay, great. All right, so I think we actually have, whoops.
You didn't call on me yet.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize you entered the meeting. Okay, please go ahead.
Me either.
What do you mean?
Oh, I didn't realize you were here. I think you weren't on my list before. Okay. Please, Commissioner Shimmer-Barron and then Commissioner Bland.
Okay. So I agree with a lot of the comments. I think that I probably still have trouble with the bay element, and because I actually think that it's the telltale sign for all of the issues around where the face of the brick is relative to the sort of to the wall to the other buildings along the block. All of the precedents that we were shown demonstrated that whether it was fire escapes or balconies or even bays, the historic ones, are secondary elements. There's a kind of an assumption and a given that the masonry plane is contiguous and for the most part constitutes the street wall, and that then those elements, whether they're bay or they're the balconies or other kind of elements, are more kind of filigree. They're the secondary, and so happen forward of it, but don't compete with that wall. Here, the design seems preoccupied with the bay element as an actual architectural piece that's equivalent that's equal to the masonry. And so it's struggling, like as they said, as the applicant has said, everyone, the office is wondering about where it should live because it's regarded as an architectural element rather than a kind of a secondary piece, utilitarian or ornamental. And I think that that's the problem, is that we can see that that's the issue. They want for it to be an architectural figure, and that's the problem, is that it's too heavy and it's too it doesn't act as secondary, and it doesn't have this kind of thinner and or utilitarian function. So I find that it's still not working, but I agree it is on some level better than the first iteration, although the first iteration strangely defined the entire thing as a kind of a street wall. And so the conflict wasn't as dramatic, I think. Anyway, I think I still have an issue with this bay piece, but I suppose I can approve the whole of it. It's better, but it's still problematic for me.
Okay, all right, thank you. And Commissioner Bland.
Yeah, I think I'm the sweep. I think this is a very, very compelling essay in contemporary contextual architecture. I think I was not there for the first time around because that building didn't look familiar to me. This is a better approach, I think, in context. I won't repeat all the things that have been already said, although I will say that there's no problem with the demolition, just to be clear on that. And secondly, I will agree with almost everybody else with a problem with the copper addition. I think that should just be another material, not brick, by the way, but turn metal or something like that, perhaps. I have no problem with the metal screen. I think it's really artfully done, and sure, it doesn't ape what is done on other buildings of much earlier era, but it uses a metal and brick vocabulary, and I think a very, very, very skillfully arranged kit of parts. So I'm much in favor of the building.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I mean, I think a couple of people have noticed or commented on the sort of curious nature of the the planes of the two pieces, the brick and the metal. And but I think most have felt comfortable with the project as is. And I do think it is interesting and curious, and it was sort of good to discuss it. I think for me, again, the benefit of being able to pull the building back to allow the corner building to read as independent is important. And I think while as I agree with Commissioner Bland, I don't think that this bay needs to actually be exactly what the historic bays and fire escapes were. I think that this is an abstract expression of the historic components of a building that ultimately allow it to read as a separate building, but also allow this composition to read as a composition, which it is honestly. So I think we can find it appropriate. I think there's a consensus to move ahead, but with the recommendation that the material of the rooftop addition be restudied to be a darker metal or other material that helps it to recede from view and relate to the existing building. And that the height of that brick fin wall be restudied in consultation with the staff, but and thinking about lowering it perhaps to relate to the adjacent building. So I'll go ahead and make this motion since we have, want to tailor this a little bit. Whoops. Let's go. Okay. So in the matter of docket number 20-01939, 21 Greenwich Avenue in the Greenwich Village Historic District, a Greek Revival style house built in 1841. And this is an application to demolish a one-story extension and construct a new building, stair and elevator bulkheads, to install rooftop mechanical equipment and construct a rooftop addition and modify an opening at the ground floor. And I note that the buildings. Style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Greenwich Village Historic District. And I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the existing one-story extension on West 10th Street, which was constructed in the late 19th century, has been highly altered and retains no significant historic fabric. Therefore, its demolition will not eliminate any significant architectural features from the building. That the presence of an infill building behind the historic corner building will not detract from the historic corner building and will be in keeping with the history of development at this site and at other corner buildings in the historic district. That the proposed 5-story height and massing of the new building will be comparable to other buildings within the historic district, will relate to the streetscape on West 10th Street, which features a variety of building heights, and will not overwhelm or detract from the historic corner building. And that the proposed contemporary design at the primary facade of the new building, featuring a recessed copper-clad entry at the ground floor, a dark brick masonry facade with thin metal framing and acid etched and clear glazing at the projecting bay, and a dark gray painted metal cornice, is a complementary counterpoint to the historic buildings in the streetscape and will reflect the layering of old and new buildings and alterations of various periods and styles found throughout the historic district. That the dark brick masonry lot line wall next to the adjacent historic building is well integrated into the design and continues the street wall at the new building and adjacent historic building, therefore reading as an extension to the facade. That the presence of a visible stair and elevator bulkhead mechanical equipment and screening at the new building will not be visible over the primary facade and will be visible only over the secondary west facade and from a distance north on Greenwich Avenue, and therefore will not detract from the building or the adjacent historic buildings. That the proposed rooftop addition at the historic corner building, set back from the Greenwich Avenue and West 10th Street facades, will maintain a sense of the building's original massing and will be seen in the context of larger adjacent buildings in the background. However, I find that the design of the the materiality of the copper-clad rooftop addition too strongly relates to the infill building and is not typical of visible rooftop accretions that are characteristic of the historic district, and that the height of the brick fin is not resolved at this time. And therefore, I recommend that the applicants work in consultation with the staff to restudy the material of the rooftop addition, to consider a dark metal material or other material that recedes from view, and that the applicants also, in consultation with the staff, restudy the height of the brick fin wall. And Commissioner Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
Okay, and Rich, will you call the vote?
Yes, Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum, and he's still muted.
I'm trying to unmute him.
Aye.
Okay, there we
Got
go.
it.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lefty,
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron. Still muted.
Aye.
Okay, 11 in favor and unopposed, the motion carries.
Okay, that's approved, and we'll move on to the next item. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move to item number 2. This is LPC 20-05254, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 843, Lot 39, 14 to 16 East 16th Street in the Ladies Mile Historic District. A Romanesque Revival style residence hall designed by R.H. Robertson and built in 1889 to 91. This is an application to demolish portions of the rear facade and rear additions, enlarge the building at the roof and rear, excavate the cellar, extend a chimney, alter the ground floor, and install signage, lighting, and windows. This was last presented at the public hearing of January 7th, 2020, and no action was taken at that time. And I'll again summarize the commissioner's comments. There was a consensus of support for the restoration of the ground floor and certain modifications for barrier-free access, with the request to continue to refine details to match the historic condition. Many commissioners supported the narrative of realizing the unbuilt upper floor, but asked the applicant to further study how it should be expressed, suggesting a different material while introducing more depth and articulation. A majority supported a contemporary design approach, while others preferred that it be faithful to the original design using real stone. The commissioners were concerned about the visibility and large irregular massing of the addition as it returned from the front facade and grew in height as seen from 16th Street. They supported the appearance and visibility of the building as seen from 15th Street. And lastly, some commissioners questioned the large amount of demolition to the building as a whole and asked the applicants to explore if more of the building or its walls could be retained. The applicant team will now present their response to those comments.
We're assigned, but I'm just saying it would be helpful to have.
Everyone should be muted who's not presenting.
Am I muted?
We can hear you.
So Sarah, if you want to unmute yourself and open the proceedings.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Harry, you are unmuted and you may proceed with the application. And all right. And before I need to
open.
I got to open it. Okay. So we need to make a motion to open the proceedings to allow the applicants to speak. So Commissioner Holford Smith, would you make that motion?
So moved.
And Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion?
Second.
And everyone in favor of opening the proceedings, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so Harry, you may begin.
Okay. Strangely, I can't see myself, but everyone can hear me and see me?
Yes, we can hear you.
And can you see me?
Well, we're focusing on the presentation, but yes, we can see you if
in this okay.
In the gallery view. Yep.
Sorry for the confusion. I guess I'm used to seeing myself in a small window, but I'll adapt. So I'm Harry Kendall with BKSK Architects. I want to start, as Cass did in the last item, by thanking the Commission for the tireless work to make these remote sessions possible. Really speaks to the importance of the process and the resilience of the process. So we're thrilled to be part of it, and I think a lot of lessons are being learned. So much appreciated and applauded. I'm here. I'll be making this presentation with my partner Todd Poisson, and also present in this virtual podium is the owner's representative, Trevor Staleski. He represents, as you may remember, a London-based ownership team who has a number of hotels there in historic buildings, and is hoping to create a sister hotel of one of them in this 16th East 16th Street location. They are, we're thrilled to say, very committed to this project still. Look forward to the resurgence of the hospitality industry in their city and in ours. So just a reminder to everyone with this cover sheet, what these three images represent. On the left, one of the clearest historic photos we found of the building when it was built as the Margaret Louisa home as an annex to the YWCA. And it was designed by R.H. Robertson, and it's been somewhat altered. You'll remember and you'll see, but it's a beauty. In the middle is so it was built in 1891. The 1892 drawing in the middle is a composite drawing by Robertson, his second attempt to realize and complete his design, which had a more expressive roof line. And on the right is our bit of a hybrid of keeping the cornice or parapet he installed in lieu of the upper floors, but
bringing back a strong evocation of his original composition. Of course, our project also involves the restoration of the ground floor, extensive reworking of the interior, expansion of the building to the rear, and these upper floors that I mentioned. So next, please. Todd will be controlling the computer, and so I'll say next when we move to the next. So as Corey said, there are a number of commissioner comments. It was a very, very productive public hearing discussion, and I think you'll see that you've provided us with a roadmap for addressing these issues, and we return to you with a much improved building. We'll sort of start from the ground floor up, but the 5 topics we've identified that contain these comments is the ground floor restoration, the massing and visibility of the new upper floors, the overall form and typology of the building. A small issue, but an important one to everyone and to us, is the neighbor building's cornice. And lastly, the crowning element, the gable screen, the fanciful roof. We've developed a significantly different set of details, and we're very excited about it. So next, please. The ground floor restoration, you asked us to look harder at the historic drawings, and we did. So here on this 4 square sheet, on the upper left, you see the zoom in on the historic photograph, or one of the historic photographs. On the right, the changes in the 1950s when it became a health center. On the left, our previous proposal, and on the right, our return with more texture on some of the stone, the lowering of the cheek walls or knee walls for the lights and the colonnettes, which are extended a little bit from the original proportion. And in general, in examining the historic photos more carefully, and in examining, frankly, the surviving detail on the upper floors, especially the 6th floor more carefully, we gained a really growing appreciation of Robertson's prowess as a detailer and idiosyncrasy. And we think we've learned from that, and we can reflect that more completely. So we can go on to the next, which has just a reminder of some of the intricacy and general mastery of detail that the existing stonework has. And I want to focus on an example on the right. On the upper right is the column capitals on the 6th floor, and on the bottom right is a zoom in of the historic photograph. You can see, more than we reflected in the previous restoration drawings, the sort of deep incised nature of the decoration in some of these key locations. The real mastery of organic shapes, and also some intriguing inventiveness. We're focusing on the sort of webbing or connective geometric design between the engaged columns. And you can see shadows of something even a little bit more robust in the photograph at the bottom right. So taking all of this into account and really working the proportions and the details more. We can go to the next. Oh, a brief reminder of what's there now at a little bit of larger scale. It's the building really, of course, has lost its street presence, and will all gain from it coming back. So next. So here's the a more rendering you can focus on a little bit more easily. I want to call to attention the textured stone lintels. We had sort of a running bond block above it, stone block before, but we were looking closer. Beautiful, beautiful curved corner lintels. The more ornate and geometric cornice that tops the stonework, the complexity of the not a pair of, but sort of 4 engaged columns and pilasters at either entrance. We have, as I mentioned, shortened the changed the proportions to reflect the grade level entrance of the building on both sides. And in general, this is something that we feel we've learned a lot from the examination, and we will continue this process as it moves toward a real restoration in consultation with staff, because it will be a labor of love of our clients and of ourselves, and we expect the masons that are tasked with the job. So this is the elevation without street trees, so you can see it fully. We will be complying with the street tree requirements, but also I think it's a general friendly move to the street, and certainly helps the facade. It's sort of interesting, the pair of trees and the pair of entrances. And next, you can see the depth and the intricacy of the historic facade. We have studied carefully what's there now, very little, but also the photographs, and we think this really accurately reflects its robust masonry presence. So to us, that's the most obvious first step, but an important one, especially if we're trying to honor the mastery of the original architect, both by his composition at the base and his composition at the top, which we'll get to at the end, which Todd will be presenting. So next, please. The massing and visibility comes next, because you're standing on the street looking at the facade, you crane your head upward and you see the new rooftop. And next, please. In the public hearing, we described, as we will again, our presumption about what the bulk of the building was as seen from the street, or what the bulk of the building really was as conceived by the architect, if he had done his gabled and hipped roof line. So you see on the drawing on the right, the red line describes our assumption of what that bulk was. We were asked how we know, because we only have an elevation with a tiny little bit of section in it on the side, but it's an incomplete set of drawings, to say the least. We are asked how we know it wasn't a false front, and that it wasn't just the roof and then the building shrunk back down to the size it was built. Well, we know that in a number of ways. Most importantly, the reason it wasn't realized is because a dormitory wasn't allowed to be more than 6 stories, and he was proposing a 7th story plus an attic, so that's why it got turned down. But also, we looked more at his compositional efforts in other buildings, and we found our way to the Academy of Medicine, a building long demolished on West 43rd Street, where he used a number of these similar elements. And you can see our red line added to the photograph at the far left. When the sloped roof is sloped up to a certain height, with the chimney rising above, did reflect the overall bulk of the building. And so we think that's a comparable compositional piece. It's in the public hearing, we showed also the YWCA building that is a companion building to this one, and they shared some aspects of the rear of the lot. This building on the Academy of Medicine has more directly comparable compositional elements. And I'll call your attention while we're on this photograph to one piece, the thickness of the stone cap on the gable and on the side gable makes a sort of robust front zone of material that then gives way to a tiled roof. So we've, as I said, we're learning from his surviving detailing on the upper floors. We're learning from some of the details of his other buildings as we consider the design for the rooftop. So on to the next with the visibility. On the left, you see our previous proposal. We showed, this is a drawing we showed, it's been altered a little bit for sake of even greater clarity, but the red line shows the presumed bulk of what Robertson had originally proposed. The blue line shows anything you can see from the the west, which is really the only point of visibility for anything we're doing. The point of greatest visibility is from approximately 80 feet west of the building, and you can see that you could see a partial 8th floor and a partial 9th floor in the previous massing. On the right, our current proposal, there is no visibility above the presumed bulk of Robertson's proposed building. We're sort of splitting hairs, but we're showing the chimney in blue because his elevation that we're examining carefully had no chimney, yet the building ultimately was built with a chimney. So we assume that had he built the rooftop, he would have had a chimney and it would have risen above. But literally speaking, we have no evidence that he proposed a bulk above that. So we're showing it in blue. As you back away from the building or walk further down the sidewalk in the next, the visibility only diminishes as it did in the previous proposal, but it's the lack of visibility of anything above that presumed bulk line continues. And as you get further away to essentially the last point of visibility of anything behind the chimney to 220 feet west, there's no further visibility. Next. So to show a little bit more analytic or clear to understand the bulk sectional drawings, here's the section on the left of our previous proposal. On the right, you can see the reduction of bulk on the side wings of the front face to a 7-story piece in on our newly proposed building, and then it remains as 9 stories in the south or left half of the building, and the connecting core is also at 9 stories between them. The mechanical bulkheads and equipment is shown in both these sections. The amount of none of which is visible from the street. The bulkheads have been lowered. The mechanical equipment has been reduced, and in general, which calms the whole composition down and makes it more coherent, we think. So next, in this sectional drawing, it's essentially the same drawing where we've stripped away the mechanical equipment just to show the bones of the building, the 7-story piece, the connecting 9-story core, and the 9-story back portion of the building. Also comment on, we'll talk about it in a minute more, the skylight in the courtyard above a full ground floor. And next, this is a section, again, the same section, but cut now through the center of the gabled roof piece on 16th Street. You can see there's a special room there, creates a double height space with a small 8th floor snuck in behind it. It's a grand suite, able to be rented, but it's also a room usable for public functions, and we expect it to be a strong element in the distinction in life of the hotel. There was a comment previously, and Todd will focus on it and show a rendering from that interior, but there was a comment that if going to the effort to create this or recreate this unusual element that was in Robertson's mind, it would be good if it provided a special function, and we've found a way to do that. So next. The third issue relating to visibility, but going into a little bit more of a conceptual direction, is the overall form of the building. One of the most interesting things about the public hearing discussion was the recognition that to make a hotel in this historic structure involves a good deal of demolition, a good deal of expansion to the rear, and additional upper floors. And there was a robust discussion about how much demolition is appropriate, and there was a suggestion, go on to the next slide, there's a suggestion that we be attentive to the typology and the formal aspects of how the new building relates to the architect's original conception and to the typology. So on the top, you see a diagram of the original building. It extends roughly almost 100 feet into the middle of the block. It has a courtyard for the dormitory rooms that is roughly centered on that 100-foot deep block. And it has a somewhat large rear yard, certainly very large for the Ladies Mile district, with a one-story connecting piece to a program element, a single-story building shared with the next door YWCA. On the bottom, you see a diagram of our proposed building, and typologically it is very, very akin. It just solves a different functional need. So it now extends about 175 feet deep into the block. It has a courtyard that is roughly centered on those two blocks, and you'll see, we'll talk about it a good bit more, the connecting link in the single-story building remains evident inside the building and extending into the rear yard, which is an as of right possibility in the proposed new building. So next. When we speak of a typology doesn't just come from a love for a certain typology. It comes from the functional requirements. And so this is those same diagrams, obviously altered here to show that the location of the original courtyard, which has a skylight and a full ground floor below it with more public rooms. But its location is responsive to the size of dorm rooms and the location of bathrooms that the original dormitory use mandated. Our proposed hotel has the same configuration, and it is, the point was made in the previous presentation that in a way that the health center this building became never did, the front facade will be animated by these individual guest rooms in a way that's reflective of the original design, original use. But the rooms have gotten a little larger, the bathrooms connect directly to the rooms as a hotel needs. So it pushes the courtyard back and makes it the same functioning element, but in with satisfying a different group of functional needs. So, and again, you'll see in the next slide that we're also including a skylight in a public space at the base of that courtyard. Next. Sorry for these pauses.
So Harry, I think it's okay. And Harry, yes, I think that the comment from the commissioners was just to have you discuss a little bit more about the required removals at the rear. I think everyone understands that the program requires there to be a deeper front and a courtyard shifted back. So if you could just quickly get to the extent of the removals, and then we can move on to the design of the addition
Sure.
in the front.
Absolutely. Absolutely. These red walls show the elements that are going to be retained. Quick orientation so you understand all this in 3 dimensions. This image is the original building with its courtyard and the rear outbuilding. Next. Sorry. The next slide highlights a number of changes that have happened to this mass over the years, both in the early part of the 20th century and the changes in the 1950 incarnation as the health center. So this existing form is been heavily compromised on the ground floor, but also a number of additions in the rear. And next. And so this now is represents in a three-dimensional way the walls we're keeping. Of course, the front facade, the side walls, 86 foot deep on the eastern side and 45 foot deep on the western side, and then in the somewhat darker gray in the back, these are the walls we're keeping that allow a perception of this this progression back through a masonry link to a masonry wall building, all of which was designed by Robertson. Now, on this drawing, I want to pause for a minute because we know the commission has received some letters in opposition to the neighbor to the east from the owner and from some occupants pointing out that in their view, the inappropriateness of closing the lot line windows. So I want to pause for a minute and look at our neighboring buildings. First, in the drawing on the left, you see that the YMCA on the upper left, now the Buddhist temple, it has a blank side wall with no fenestration, and where they had necessary windows, they recessed the wall to allow those windows to remain sacrosanct. Likewise, the tenement building to the bottom right it sets back slightly in the rear of the building so that those are not lot line windows, but rather setback windows in a way that a tenement building often is. Our neighbor to the east, shown on the right-hand drawing, is itself has a very interesting history of expansion. The long wall we're keeping is a reflection, is a vestige of an earlier 1853 residential building that was on the site, 4 stories plus a basement high. By 1859, that building had been extended in a large single-story shed to the rear, and it became the Alamania Club, the Free Drawing School, and a succession of club use buildings. We don't know whether the residential building was hotel rooms for the club in the back or exactly how it was configured. But in 1907, it was replaced by this 7-story building. So it rose 3 stories higher. It also went all the way to the rear of the lot, and it included this grouping of lot line windows. So in 1907, the owner or the architect or both chose to make use of the light available at the rear of the block. Unlike the neighbors to the west, they didn't include a setback or a light shaft to protect those windows in the instance of a as of right development as is now proposed. So we want to point out, so this drawing shows what we're keeping. It also highlights what is being covered over by our extension to the rear. So next, please. This is a section drawing on the left showing most of the lot line windows. There, another row goes behind a little carved out corner of the original historic building. And on the right, our new section showing that there are 4 lot line windows remaining that led onto our new courtyard. Two other points to make very quickly. The lot line windows are not mentioned in the designation report in any way. And secondly, and more importantly, this drawing was, our client met with the owner of the adjacent building last year and showed this exact drawing. They chose not to come to the public hearing either for the community board or landmarks, and they've been voicing these concerns more recently. So next, please. To sum up the form and the typology section, we just show an axon and metric showing the previous proposal, which will come up, there it is. On the left, the previous proposal. On the right, the current proposal of the courtyard building with a number of historic wall is retained and a reduced bulk on the street face. So that's those first three topics. I'm now going to turn it over to my partner Todd, who will discuss the topic of the adjacent cornice and then end with the rooftop language we're proposing. Thank you very much.
Okay.
If you can unmute Todd.
Oh, I think I have to do that myself. Hi, I'm Todd Poisson, partner at BPSK. So the adjacent neighboring cornice at 18 East 16th is directly east of us. Page. We were asked to revisit our previous proposal's intent of modifying the neighbor's encroaching cornice. Previously, shown on the left, we were proposing to cut off, which in blue, what amounts to a 3'4" section at the backside of the cornice's return to allow our addition to nestle under it. On the right, the current proposal does not modify the cornice's, the neighbor's cornice. We've pushed back the front wall of our proposed new roof massing 17 inches and lowered the roof line a bit, so there is no longer any need to alter the cornice. Pushing the wall back will also allow our corner roof parapet detail to remain intact as well, because the wall will be back here. Okay, the last chapter is about the design of the proposed gable rooftop enlargement, and particularly the nature, the material, and the details of the rain screen, location of the rain screen we propose to clad it with. This is where the commissioner's comments really led us to a kind of a design breakthrough that we're really excited to share with you. Next, when it comes up, this is the piece of the 19th century drawing by Robertson you've seen before, depicting his proposed rooftop addition, reflecting his original intent for the top of the building, continuing the Romanesque language of the sandstone and brick up into a central gabled pediment with a recessed wing on either side. The side wings have sloped roofs intersecting the central gable. But as we know, the building remained at 6 stories and instead had a robust arcaded parapet here. So previously, we proposed an enclosure shrouded, you'll see in a second, by perforated metal screen, evoking Robertson's drawing. And we had hung the screen to drape partially over the parapet. So the commission was concerned that the screen was difficult to understand both literally and figuratively. There was concern regarding metal being too thin, lacking the depth and texture to really go toe-to-toe with Landmark's robust masonry. There was discussion regarding the metal screen's joints between the panels and the framework behind the screen, possibly being too visible and distracting. And there was objection to obscuring the parapet. We were really most inspired by the debate you had afterwards regarding whether one should just propose brick and stone as Robertson intended. And while there was a yearning for the feel of masonry, the consensus was we should somehow consider masonry, but not in a literally historic way. So today we present a contemporary masonry screen, which is any minute now. Made of ultra high performance cast masonry, known as ductile concrete, with a perforation pattern, color, and texture inspired by the robust masonry details facade, especially the deeply carved capitals at the 6th floor in the top photo, and the detail work in the 5th floor arches in the middle photo, and the flatter, almost screen-like medallions above the 2nd floor windows. The top photo also captures the intricate cross-hatched masonry webbing between each pair of engaged columns. We also took cues from the diagonal window mullion tracery of the 6th floor as well, to produce a pattern of 2 interweaving layers of ductile, incorporating the organic nature of the masonry details and the linear organization implied by the X and Y shaped diagonal pattern of the tracery. When seen directly across the street, any second. The new roof profile completes the triple pediment composition that Robertson originally intended, with some corresponding materiality, texture, and color now. The screen has been pushed back 12 inches from its previous location, allowing the existing parapet to be unobstructed now. So the central gable was pushed back 12 inches and the two lateral wings were pushed back 17 inches. So the whole composition appears a bit smaller from this perspective, but are actually the same height, they're just pushed back. There are two tones of color in the masonry screen, a lighter shade where Robertson intended sandstone and a warmer, darker tone where he intended brick, recalling the warm color of the textured brick around the 5th floor arches and zones in between the windows that you can see on the 3rd and 4th floor there as well. Where Robertson intended brick in the gable, the kind of darker, warmer tone in there, both colors exist in the screen with the reddish tone on the outer layer and the lighter tone on the recessed layer. Each layer is 3 inches thick. So the screen itself is between 3 and 6 inches, depending, 3 and 6 inches thick, depending on the specific spot you're looking at. Both layers are cast together as one integral screen. The reddish tone is achieved by a high performance stain over the lighter tone, which is cast into the body through the whole screen. And the larger window-like apertures in the screen have 12-inch ductile returns, including at the lunette windows, which we interpreted from Robertson's arched blind niches in the drawing. So these deep returns match the deep set window returns in the historic facade. The screen assembly is still hangs in front of the glass enclosure, which now sits 30 inches behind the parapet, which you'll see in a section in a minute. Because the ductile screen is much thicker than the previously proposed metal, the nighttime glow through the perforated screen is more subtle, but still unexpected in kind of a whimsical way. Just a quick slide on ultra high performance concrete. It's a well-established building material. It was developed in the 1980s as a structural material, and starting in the 90s has been used as decorative screening, as seen in these examples in France. It could be produced in very large panels. You can see here on the right, especially on the right, you could see some joints between panels in the colored, large colored panels up there in the upper right. We'll show you shortly how we intend to seal our joints. Our screen will appear more monolithic. We did a full-scale mock-up of a section, a 14-inch by 14-inch section of the screen, right as the two layers in the screen reverse position. That detail occurs at the top of the arches of the lunettes. The photo, and that's the photo in the middle. The photo on the left is the back side of the screen. So this is what you see from the inside of the building through the glass enclosure. The flat surface, as a result of being on top of the casting mold, gives an entirely different effect to the interiors than the textured exterior face does to the exterior. And a close-up of the 6th floor sandstone capitals and webbed screening is at the right. And we also did a 3D print of the whole top of the building. You can see light spilling out of the perforations in the sloped surface of the roof. That surface which is capping the gap between the face of the pediment and the glass enclosure behind. And that line in the roof recalls the same line where the stone cap at Robertson's 43rd Street building, Harry just showed us earlier, marks the beginning of the roof tiles. The rest of the roof here is proposed as a perforated ring screen as well, of a similar material as the front screen, stood off from the weatherproof roof structure below. On this page, you can see the existing parapet plays a role in both the exterior design and the interior design. It's the new screen is either behind the parapet or slightly above the parapet, but never touching the parapet. On the left, you could see the 3-inch gap between the top of the parapet and the bottom of the screen. The screen has been pushed back 12 inches from before. So instead of being 2 inches in front of the parapet and hanging over partially, obscuring the parapet, it is now 10 inches behind the front edge of the parapet. The model, unfortunately, doesn't capture the real texture of the sandstone above the 6th floor windows or the crazy texture velvety brick above the arches, in between the arches of the 5th floor, but does start to capture this beautiful floral decoration carved into the sandstone at the bookends of the parapet and the bookends of the 6th floor entablature to kind of hint at the marrying of the textures that we're trying to accomplish here. The interior space is behind the screen, as Harry hinted at. They could be rented as a combined private suite or quasi-public event space. last time we saw you, we had the floor slab that Harry mentioned in section, hover, in the middle here, interrupting the space. And there was comments to explore something like this instead. And our client has been very keen on the potential of art shows and other events in the space. So we're really happy to take that note. There are 3 operable sections in the glass layer to allow for maintenance only access into the gutter area between the parapet and the glass surface, and also to access the backside of the screen. There's the 3 operable sections are 1, 2, and 3. In section, the glass enclosure is 30 inches behind the back of the parapet. And you're going to see that in a section coming up on the right. There are steel outriggers lining the pediment frame, the pediment frame, roof line, from which the ductile screen is hung. So even though the ductile screen is much heavier than this metal screen was, there's no framework attached to the back of the screen. And we only have these small stainless steel brackets projecting from the glass walls, structural mullions, to counter wind load. There's only 5 panels in the gable face. They're colored differently here just to illustrate their sizes and the joint locations. The pink and green panels hang from the bottom of the blue panel, which in turn hangs from the perimeter outriggers. So even though we have some joints, a lot fewer than before, they're disguised, as I hinted before, with painted sealant in the lap joints. So the joints are painted out, and the joints themselves are lap joints. So there's no, depending on the time of day, there's no light or dark lines in the screen. It appears monolithic. The gap behind the parapet, from the backside of the parapet to the glass enclosure, creates a gutter that is accessed through those 3 portals in the glass that we saw a second ago. So the more oblique the view of the gable from the street, the more it appears as an articulated masonry facade. And the screen's thickness prevents diagonal views up and through, as opposed to previously being able to see hints of the structure behind, which is on the left here. And then the last thing I'll mention is the chimney. We're proposing to extend it vertically, utilizing salvaged sandstone details from the top of the existing historic chimney, seen on the right here in its new location. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, do we have any questions for the applicants? Okay, please raise your hand if you have any questions. Okay, Commissioner Jefferson, please go ahead.
Is the lot line window that now exists, does it exist now? A, question A. Question B, are you covering them up in this proposal?
Yes, and I don't know if Harry's unmuted. I'll go back to that page.
Todd, go ahead and answer.
So yes, to both. They exist now in the neighbor's building. They're lot line windows of 18 East 16th Street. As Harry explained, they were popped in when they extended their building southerly here. I hope it doesn't go further than that. I hit the button a lot. The eastern neighbor used to only be as big as the party wall. The party wall is the ghost of that 1853 house that used to be there. In 1907, they extended, the new owner of the building extended as much as many Ladies Mile buildings did, occupy the whole deep site. As Harry pointed out, they did not choose to recess these windows as the YMCA building did. Ironically, the YMCA building, as we know, was connected to our building, but even they recessed their windows and they did not choose to put any windows on the lot line itself. And the tenement building, right, as Harry pointed out, has windows which were set back too.
Just a question, the tenement building is rental? It's just rental apartments, that's what it is?
This one's rental residential. The long building here is commercial building.
Okay, and the back one?
The back building that faces on 15th Street is residential. They have a few windows that look out onto our rear yard and they will continue to.
Okay, so just so the long building is commercial, not residential. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. This is a commercial rental commercial building.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so not seeing any questions, think we'll move to our discussion now. And so commissioners, as you recall, the last time we saw this application, we had a very long presentation about the planned program and development here. And there were really 4 outstanding issues. One was we asked the applicants to look at the level and detail of restoration at the ground floor of the front facade. We asked them to consider the amount of removal behind the facade. We asked them to reduce the massing and visibility of the addition from the street. And we also asked that they consider the materiality and details of the screen. While many were intrigued with the idea of the screen as an abstract kind of ghost or expression of the original design drawing, that there were concerns about the metal material and the transparency of it. So they have revised that to be a masonry material with new details, which they've presented today. So with those 4 concerns as kind of the context for the discussion here, let's go ahead. And Commissioner Bland, why don't we start with you?
All right. Well, I think this is very intriguing.
Oh, excuse me, sorry. Brett, I'm just cutting you off. I do want to turn to Rich to note for the record that we did receive some letters. So Rich and these letters have all been shared with the commission. Rich, can you just note for the record what the letters are?
Yes, so LPC received letters in opposition to the project from 18 East 16th Street. A letter was also received from the local council member's office recommending denial to allow the applicant to address the neighbors' concerns. And Borough President Brewer issued a letter asking the commission to delay the public meeting to facilitate conversations between the neighbor and the applicant.
Okay. And as you heard, the applicant has addressed the issues related to the neighbors' windows. Okay, so now Commissioner Bland, let's go ahead with our discussion.
Thank you. Well, I think this is an exciting proposal, and like the applicant stated, I hope that this project proceeds in our post-COVID era. It would be wonderful to have this project move forward. I think probably I was one of the ones that was intrigued by the idea before with the roof articulation, but I think it's come a long way now, and I'm quite intrigued by this notion of using the masonry screen material as opposed to the metal. Wait for others to weigh in on this, but I think Sarah, you used the word ghost. I think that's an appropriate way of seeing this, particularly since you can see through it in the evening in a different way. I think it's an intriguing adaptive reuse of this really handsome building. I shouldn't focus only on that, though. I should focus also on the extraordinary rebuilding of the whole base of the building, which is an extraordinary feat. And I just want to say that, boy, will God be in the details here. So working very closely with the fabricators and our own staff to be sure that this doesn't come off as a kind of a faux or a false application all these years later. But I think what they're undertaking is really magnificent in that regard. Regarding the lot line windows, maybe I didn't follow everything, but my understanding is that the lot line windows are there, but it's a commercial use. Therefore, I believe they're not required. to be there for light and air and occupancy purposes. Lot line windows are almost always there at some risk, and maybe the risk here is going to happen. But for me, the bigger issue is that this building becomes this boutique hotel, and I think what the applicant has shown us is a very good, a terrific scheme. So I'll end with that.
Thank you. All right, well, Commissioner Lutfi.
I'm going to just echo what Fred has said. I want to thank the applicants for, listening to the commissioners and just going back and making what was already a wonderful project even better. The work at the base is that the tweaks are wonderful. I mean, everything from it's sort of, in a way, it's more harmonious, it's simpler, but the texture is really present, and it doesn't compete with what's above it. It's proportions around the doors of the columns and the pilasters are much more elegant, and of course the at street access is wonderful, and I do like the two trees here. The massing of the building seems to work better overall. It's more regular, which I appreciate, and I think the gable screen has really come a long way, and the use of masonry is smart, and I think it's going to look beautiful. And light, because it can be penetrated with light, but also substantial. So I think that's it.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go to Commissioner Jefferson.
I think it's a beautiful project. And I especially love the gable because it's going to, from the interior, it's such a delightful room. So I think it's a wonderful project.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Gustafson.
This building has such a beautiful facade that it's easy to forget that it's not an individual landmark, that it's we're looking at it because it's in the historic district, which gives us a lot more leeway in terms of what is acceptable. I think they did, starting with the facade at street level, they're doing a beautiful job. It's exemplary. The attention to detail is terrific. And in some ways, they've actually improved it. In terms of the visibility of the rooftop additions, I think that using the presumed bulk and massing line from the unbuilt gable is a fair standard to use. And in that respect, the visibility is fine. In terms of the neighboring cornice, they resolved that issue obviously completely. In terms of the amount of removal, I think I was okay with it in the first place, and I'm okay with it now. On the gable screen, I was, I think, the one voice that said, well, if you're going to go through all this trouble, why don't you just build it? Of course, my preference is not the standard. Appropriateness is, and I think this is actually very, very appropriate. I think they did a wonderful job sort of balancing between rebuilding creating the thing that was never there, and giving it some substance that will be a perfect cap to this building. I think it's terrific.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Shamir Baran. Oops.
Sarah.
Yes.
Thank you. So wonderful to see, as others have said, the ground floor restoration work proposed, and I think they've done a lot with the massing and the visibility. Very glad to see that they're retaining and rebuilding the neighboring cornice. I think that will help a lot. I was originally very intrigued with the screening ghosting effect, and think this use of high performance concrete is is an interesting experiment. I think if there's one thing that I'm not that convinced about, it's the actual figure of the pattern, that kind of chevron pattern. I'm wondering if maybe they might want to work on sort of translating some of the capitals, the column capitals that exist in the building that are kind of a little bit more floral in their figure, but that's a side matter, and I'm sure they'll resolve that. But I'm very much in support of this project and find it appropriate and exciting.
Great, thank you. And Commissioner Holford-Smith.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with the comments that have been previously said, so we won't go into any more detail, but I really think that the use of the ductile concrete for the gable is really an inventive solution, and I think we'll be much more successful in evoking that original design, and I think it's terrific, and I can't wait to see it built.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chapin.
Yes, I was intrigued originally by the idea of the ghost reflection of the original architect's or his original intent before it was reduced. And I think that the use of the masonry screen is much more successful, and I'm pleased about that. And I also think that the reduced visibility of the roof elements through reducing the massing has been very important. So I can approve this as presented.
Okay, and Commissioner Goldblum.
Okay. I don't disagree with what folks were saying. I do want to say that the project still involves a significant removal of the fabric of the building that bears note. I don't think, I think that we have been very flexible in the past with that kind of thing when it comes to adaptive reuses. And I don't think we should change that policy, but I do think that the project is very much a kind of a facade without a whole lot of building behind it being preserved. And that's a cause for thoughtfulness, at least. I think that the stepping back of I think that the thing about the rooftop addition that I think about is that it's very different from most rooftop additions that we do, in that it's if you look at it in isolation, it's a very curious thing. It doesn't really, it has this kind of very crusty, grainy, granular, pixelated quality to it but relatively flat at a distance. That I originally was concerned about. Most rooftop additions have a kind of internal design integrity that kind of stands independent of the building and acts as a kind of a contrast to the building. This is trying to do something different. This is trying to be a historicizing addition at the same time that it's a very contemporary one. And that's unusual. I think it works. I think it's worthy of an experiment, but I'm worried that it might not come out as good as it looks in the renderings. So I'm a little nervous about it. Ductile is a great material. It's very flexible, and the image of the mock-up was really lovely. I just worry about it from the street level as looking very flat, even though it has a lot of dimensionality up close. But I think they've done everything that they should. I think that the fact that it sits on the parapet may be a bad idea. It may be better if it slipped behind it completely and left the parapet alone, just in terms of its relationship between the existing building. It is, after all, meant to be seen as something modern and new, and because of its flatness and because of its materiality. So from that point of view, I think it might be better if it were set back a little bit. I think that the research they've done on the ground floor and the modifications are really excellent and will make this a much better project.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Devonshire, please go ahead.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I was completely against the metal screen, which I thought was just a wrong direction and it was flimsy. I am totally in favor of what they're doing now. I think to ease Adi's concerns a little bit, I actually saw that there is a nod towards some of that floral pattern in the column capitals at the base in that texture of the openings in this screen. I share Commissioner Goldblum's concerns that it's actually too close to the balustrade. I'd like to see it pushed back to give at least the impression that there is a terrace of some kind there. But otherwise, I think it's vastly improved, and I can approve it.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Chen.
I agree with almost everything that the commissioner have said. I think that the street view from the street about the top, the gable, Commissioner Goldblum's comments were excellent. I think it's really worth it to give it a try. And it really, the devil is in the details, how it will look from the pedestrian point of view, but it's worth giving it a try to go forward.
Okay, so I think that we have a consensus to approve it as is today. 3 commissioners did specifically point out the placement of the screen on the parapet and expressed a preference to see that set back. But I think we have enough votes as is, and I would encourage the applicants to continue to study, explore that idea, even with an approval. So I'm going to ask Commissioner Lutfi, would you read this motion?
Sure. In the matter of docket 20-05254, 14-16 East 16th Street, Ladies Mile Historic District, a Romanesque revival style residence hall designed by R.H. Robertson and built in 1889-91. The application is to demolish portions of the rear facade and rear additions, enlarge the building at the roof and rear, excavate the cellar, extend a chimney, alter the ground, and install signage, lighting, and windows. I note that the building's style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Ladies Mile Historic District. I also note that 14-16 East 16th Street was originally constructed as the Margaret Louisa home of the YWCA as part of a complex including 7 to 11 East 15th Street, that the rear facade features an annex pavilion, garden space, and an enclosed corridor link, and that alterations to the ground floor at the East 16th Street facade occurred circa 1951 with the conversion of the building to a health center. I further note that only a portion of this block is within the Ladies Mile Historic District and features a variety of commercial, institutional, and residential buildings primarily constructed in the mid-19th to early 20th centuries, ranging in height from 3 stories to 17 stories. I recommend approval, finding that the ground floor has been heavily altered in an unsympathetic fashion, and therefore the work will not cause the elimination of any significant historic fabric, that the restoration of the base of the building, including rusticated cladding, entrance porticos, and window openings, will recall the historic design and return the building closer to its historic appearance while allowing for barrier-free access. Wait a minute. Did I lose anything? Hold on. Yes, the wrong page. that the proposed metal framed glass entrance will be simple in design and compatible with the restored entrance porticos, that the plinths with lanterns flanking each entrance will recall the historic condition at a position closer to the facade and lower in height to be compatible with the scale of the new at-grade entrances, that the replacement windows will match the configuration, materials, details, and finish of the historic windows, and that the change in operation will not detract from the overall fenestration. That the proposed signage at the ground floor will be small in scale and will be located at an area that was originally used for signage at this building. That the light fixtures will be installed at discrete locations, including windowsills and cornices, and will not call undue attention to themselves. That demolition of portions of the rear of the building featuring simple facades with plain brickwork and windows fronting light courts and portions of the corridor and annex will not result in the removal of any significant architectural features of the building and will allow for portions of the facades to be reconfigured in a manner that supports the adaptive use of this building. That the proposed height of the rooftop and rear yard additions will result in a building of a height that relates successfully to the streetscape on East 16th and East 15th Streets, which feature a variety of building heights. That the design and massing of the proposed rooftop addition is inspired by the architect R.H. Robertson's original intent for the building to have a 7th story under a peaked roof, as evidenced in a historic drawing. That the rooftop addition will be partially set back from the historic balustrade, thereby leaving the significant architectural feature intact and distinguishing the addition from the building's overall massing. That the materials and finishes of the street-facing portion of the proposed rooftop addition, utilizing glass curtain walls and perforated masonry screening in unconventional ways, will distinguish the addition from the historic building. That the contemporary masonry screening will evoke the foliate detailing and depth of historic carved stone ornamentation found elsewhere on the facade, while interpreting these details in a modern way through design, color, and texture. That the decorative historic chimney will be raised in conjunction with the proposed rooftop addition, therefore retaining the significant feature. That the depth of the proposed building on the lot is consistent with the depth of large commercial buildings in this historic district, which historically did not have substantial rear yards or connected green space. That the plan of the rear yard addition featuring an open light court and retaining the masonry walls of the existing historic rear pavilion and portions of the rear facade and connector, including a curved bay, will recall the plan and open space of the historic building while retaining historic fabric. That the materials of the rear and side facades featuring brick and a masonry rain screen system and metal mechanical screenings at the bulkheads will not call undue attention to themselves and will be in keeping with traditional materials found at rear facades within this district. That the visible portion of the rear facade, clad in brick and featuring regular punched masonry openings, will be in keeping with the simple articulation of secondary facades within the streetscape, which are sometimes seen above shorter buildings in the foreground. And that the excavation for a new subcellar floor will be designed and conducted in compliance with the Department of Buildings regulations under the supervision of a licensed engineer to protect the building and the adjacent buildings.
Okay, and Commissioner Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
Okay, and Rich will call the vote.
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Alexa,
I'm
stop.
reminding you,
Alexa, stop.
wash my hands.
Alexa, stop.
Commissioner Devonshire,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
Commissioner Shamir Barron, who is on mute.
Sarah, how do I turn this thing off? With the
Sorry,
red light.
Commissioner Shamir Barron.
Hi.
Okay, thank you. All right, 11 in favor, none opposed, the motion carries.
Okay, so that's approved. And Harry and Todd, I would ask you to continue to explore the location of that screen as it relates to the parapet and continue to talk to staff about that as you explore it. But it's approved as is, and good luck. And we'll move to the.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So commissioners, why don't we take a 3-minute break and then we'll move to 11 Hubert after that, okay? Okay. And so just turn your video and your sound off. And when you come back, turn your video back on so we'll know that you're there. And we'll just take 3 minutes. Okay.
I just wanted to remind you that I have to leave today at noon.
Okay. All right. All right, Corey, I think we have enough to get started, and 3 are still missing, but they can join as soon as they come back.
Okay, great. We'll go ahead and start with item number 3. This is LPC 20-04556, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 214, Lot 12, 11 Hubert Street in the Tribeca West Historic District. A garage and office building designed by Dietrich Wortman and built in 1946, altered again in 1989 and 90. The application is to demolish the existing building and construct a new building. This was last presented at the public meeting of March 3rd, 2020. And again, I'll give a brief summary of commissioners' comments from that time. There was a consensus of support for the height and massing of the new building and the contemporary design approach. The commissioners also supported the design of the Collister Street facade and the ground floor treatment of the Hubert Street facade, all of which had been redesigned and presented at the last public meeting in response to prior commissioners' comments. With regard to the upper floors of the Hubert Street facade, some commissioners asked that the design and material of the cornice be restudied, and some were also concerned about the monolithic appearance of the glazing and asked for additional divisions or other articulation to be incorporated. The applicant team will present their response to those comments after we reopen the proceedings.
Thank you, Corey. And let's make a motion to open the proceedings. Commissioner Gustafson, would you make that motion? To open the proceedings to allow the applicants to speak?
So moved.
And Commissioner Jefferson, would you second that motion?
I second that motion.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. And I'm just having trouble unmuting a couple of people for the vote. Commissioner, okay, that's all right. Commissioner Devonshire and Commissioner Goldblum have not yet returned. So of the rest of us, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, proceedings are open, and Ward, you may begin.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Commissioners. Ward Dennis with Higgins Quaysbarth. I'm joined by Eric Cobb, the project architect, Peter Belsinski, and Lake and Cole from my office. Corey summarized the comments from the last public meeting in March. We have, in response to your comments, revised the proposed design for both the cornice and the glass facade on Hubert Street. We have also continued to refine the details for the shutters at the base of Hubert Street, and we will show you those new changes. So this is a proposal for a new building at the corner of Collister and Hubert Street in the Tribeca West Historic District. The proposed new building is a modern design that uses a simple palette of materials to explore depth and planes within the narrow construct of a New York City building site. At the last public meeting, we were asked to restudy the design of the cornice and the treatment of this wider area of the glass facade at the western portion on Hubert Street. As you can see in the image on the right, we have changed the cornice to match the material and scale to the historic cornices on Hubert Street. and we have broken down the upper portion of the western glazing into major and minor steel mullions. The major divisions in the facade follow the interior program with a major cross, and the areas of glass within are further broken up by robust steel fins. These changes are in keeping with the original compositional goals of the design and enhance the subtle play of depth, texture, and planes of the facade. This is a detail of the proposed cornice. Consistent with the other metal elements on the facade, the cornice is constructed of a dark finish steel. The cornice height is driven partially by structural concerns as it conceals a beam and parapet across the top of the building. The design of the cornice reflects the same play of planes and depth that we find elsewhere in the facade, and the height of the cornice is consistent with historic cornices on the street, although I should note that the cornice immediately adjacent to us is a non-historic fiberglass replacement, slightly different in scale from historic cornices elsewhere on the street. In this image, we can see some of the depth and texture that is created by the introduction of steel mullions to the glazing. You can also see in this image some of the interaction of the planes on the facade as the glazing in this larger area projects out 12 inches from this reveal on the right and 12 inches from the narrower section of glazing to the left. The mullions that we are showing here are constructed of hand-finished blackened stainless steel, which we showed samples of in earlier hearings. And to be clear, these are not beauty caps, but rather substantial elements that will add further depth and appropriately break down the glazing. What is shown here, this horizontal where my hand is now, is a 12-inch tall steel channel at the floor spandrel between the upper and lower section on this area of the facade. And then above, these are 8-inch deep by 1 1/4 inch tall steel fins. So we'll see details of both of these in a moment. As I mentioned, we have continued to refine the design of the shutters at the base of the building. These, the latest design is shown on the right. These obviously recall shutters that we find throughout the Tribeca historic districts, and they also allow us to have both privacy and light coming in and out of the building because this is a residential building. These are details of the metal mullions that are proposed for the Hubert Street facade. This is that on the bottom right is that 12-inch tall C channel that I mentioned. It is 4 inches deep and it bolts through the glass. And then at the top right is the 8-inch deep horizontal mullions that we have. These also bolt through the glass, and you can see that they are 1 1/4 inch high. So these are very substantial elements. The vertical fins at the left are similarly 8 inches projecting from the glass, 10 inches to the backside of the glass. And I'm going to ask Eric Cobb to just come in here for 1 second and show the sample of the C channel that we have. Eric, are you unmuted?
Yes, thank you, Ward.
Can everybody see Eric?
Yes, can you hear me okay? Okay,
Go
so
ahead.
the C channel is 12 inches in width here. This is a 4-inch profile. And so this same channel is used horizontally and vertically for the cross members on the facade. The 8-inch fin, this sample is only 1 inch. We would actually be 1 1/4 inch, but this is the scale of the projecting fin, also used horizontally and vertically.
Thank you, Eric.
Is that the conclusion?
I was just going to summarize with 2 different views, if I could.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, so this image shows the full building with Collister Street to the left and Hubert Street to the right. As a reminder, the primary masonry material on Collister Street is a light gray Roman brick. The brick is carried on these very large panels that you can see here. Again, creating that subtle play of depth on the facade. And in this case, these panels project out 12 inches from the glazing adjacent. The brick also carries down to the base at Collister Street. That is a change that we made in the last go around. At the Hubert Street facade, this narrower portion of glazing is set back again 12 inches from the portion of glazing to the right, and that projecting piece then sets back at the reveal to the far right. And then this is a view taken from Collister Street looking looking west on Hubert Street. You can see again the minor fins that project out 8 inches, and then the major C channels, which Eric just showed a sample of, the revisions to the cornice, and you can see further down on Collister some of the historic cornices that are taller and more robust elements than the one immediately adjacent to us. You can also see in this image, you can start to see through the building, and that is an important part of the architecture here. As a reminder, both wings of the building, both the Collister wing and the Hubert wing, are only about 20 feet deep, and that is due to a light and air easement that occurs with the building to our right. As you can see on this elevation, the wider 3/5 area of glass corresponds to the courtyard beyond, and then the narrower 2/5 area of glass on the left here corresponds to the Collister wing of the building. And here I will I will close with this view looking east on Hubert Street. I hope that the commissioners appreciate the level of care and attention that has gone into this design, the interplay of both big and small moves within the design to create this dialogue between different planes happening on the facade. And I think that the changes we have done and the changes that you have encouraged us to do have made this a much better project. There I will end.
Thank you very much. Okay, commissioners, do we have any questions for the applicant team? Please raise your hand if you have any questions. All right, not seeing any questions. I think we can move to the next step. Rich, I think we have one letter, but can you let us know if we have any letters that were submitted on the revised proposal?
Just one letter in opposition.
Okay, thanks. And again, that was shared with the commissioners prior to today. Okay, so let's move to our discussion, and I'm going to jump across the table and start with Commissioner Holford-Smith. And just as we, again, think about the comments, this is the third time this is before us. So we have already looked at changes to the Collister Street side. And today, the remaining issue was really the expression on the Hubert Street facade. But the proposal does include the demolition of the existing building, which is a 1940s garage that had a later 2-story addition, and obviously the height, massing, and materials and details of the entire facade. So with that, Commissioner Holford-Smith, will you go ahead?
Sure. I know one of my comments on the last viewing of this was in regards to the cornice. And so I appreciate the change in the material of the cornice. I think it's much more appropriate. And I think in general, the small and big moves that they've done in this latest version are an improvement, and I think are appropriate. The shutters on the ground floor, I think, relate much better to sort of traditional shutters that you find in sort of cast iron buildings in Tribeca. And I think the change to the glazing helps to address the scale and sort of thin quality of the cable glazed section of the glass that some people had comments about. So I think the changes are appropriate, and I find it acceptable.
Okay, great. And Commissioner Chapin.
Yes, I agree. I think that the demolition is appropriate, and I'm pleased with the changes to the cornice and the changes to the fenestration pattern in order to break up the large expanses of glass. And I think this is successful and I can approve it.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Goldblum?
I agree. No, I think it's
Okay.
acceptable.
Commissioner Devonshire?
Sarah, they've addressed the concerns I had. I can approve this.
Okay. Commissioner Chen?
Same here.
Okay. Commissioner Bland?
Yes, my concern mostly was the cornice, and I think they've made the changes that lightened it up, and I think I was fine with everything else, so I'm fine with it now.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lutfi?
Yeah, I agree. I do want to say that this has been quite a journey and from where we've started. I feel like, especially at the beginning, we, all of the commissioners had a lot of problems with this design. And, you know, we've sent the applicant back more than once. This is, you know, they're back now for the third time. And I just want to thank the applicant for doing everything that you could to address our concerns. And I think you have been successful. And I especially think if you could just go to page 8 for a minute. Look at it from, so one back. If you look at it from this perspective and see not only the improvement in the cornices, that, you know, the relation between the two buildings, but also, you know, the now interesting articulation in the facade that just wasn't there, that, you know, we just were persistent about. And I feel like if you know, I want to thank the applicant for, you know, trying again and succeeding. And I also think that the shutters at the base work better and they speak more to what's going on above. So that's it.
Thank you. Commissioner Jefferson?
I can approve it.
Okay. Commissioner Gustafson?
I can approve it as well. Nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. And just to note for the record that Commissioner Shimmer-Barron has left for the day, so she's no longer here for this or other items. Okay, so I think we have a consensus for an approval. And Commissioner Holford-Smith, would you read that motion?
Sure. In the matter of LPC 20-04556, 11 Hubert Street in the Tribeca West Historic District. A garage and office building designed by Dietrich Wortmann and built in 1946 and altered in 1990. The application is to demolish the existing building and construct a new building. I note that this northernmost portion of the Tribeca West Historic District is characterized by mid and late 19th century warehouses and store and loft buildings, several of which feature granite bases and cladding, and that the neighboring buildings on Hubert Street include a 13-story office building constructed in 1997 and 3 5-story mid-19th century store and loft buildings. I further note that prior to the construction of the existing garage in 1949, a 6-story warehouse building occupied the site, and that the 2-story rooftop addition was built just prior to the designation of the district in 1989-1990. I recommend approval, finding that the existing 1940s garage building was significantly altered in the 1980s with a 2-story addition, and therefore its demolition will not detract from the special historic and architectural character of the Tribeca West Historic District. That the mat height of the proposed new building will relate to the adjacent building heights and the streetscapes of Hubert and Collister Streets, and will restore the continuity of the street walls to the 6-story height of the historic warehouse building, which is located on the site from the 19th to mid-20th centuries. That the proposed facades are articulated in a tripartite arrangement of base, shaft, and capital, recalling the typical facade composition of the store and loft buildings located throughout this historic district. That the proposed materials palette featuring light gray Roman brick, granite, blackened steel, and glass is in keeping with masonry materials and industrial finishes and elements at adjacent historic buildings. That the proposed detailing of the Collister and Hubert Street facades featuring layered panels of brick, granite, and glass, steel flange, channel, spandrels, and piers, and glass panels with steel mullions and fins recalls the articulated detailing found at buildings in the district, while attributing the building's contemporary design. But the design and detailing of the ground floor featuring steel piers, perforated metal shutters, and a steel awning wrapping the corner recalls the cast iron storefront shutters, continuous corner beams, and hourglass bulkhead grills found at historic storefronts. That the fenestration pattern of the Collister Street facade, composed of glazed and screened blind masonry openings, references the proportions of repeating bays that are characteristic of 19th century loft buildings. That the punched openings and the granite bulkhead at the ground floor of the Collister Street facade are in keeping with the open rhythm of openings within the streetscape. That the large-scale glazing at the upper floors of the Hubert Street facade is broken down by tinted glazing, projecting fins, and exterior mullions, recalling the level of depth and articulation found at historic buildings within the historic district. That the ground floor opening on Hubert Street recalls the scale of the existing garage doors at this level and is harmonious with the industrial character of the historic district. That the attic story, composed of a blackened steel panel cornice, helps provide a termination to the facades, and that the bulkhead and mechanical room enclosures at the roof will be viewed at a distance within the context of taller neighboring buildings and other rooftop accretions, helping these installations remain a discrete presence.
Sarah, we
Sorry,
need a second.
Commissioner Devonshire, would you soak in that motion? I am just calling Commissioner Devonshire.
I will second that.
Commissioner, thank you. And Rich, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Check. Okay. Commissioner Bland.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
And Commissioner Lepke.
Aye.
Okay, 10 in favor, none opposed, the motion carries.
Okay, so that's approved. Thank you. And we'll move on to the next item.
Thank you, commissioners.
The next item is number 4, LPC 19-40189. An application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, block 1887, lot 50, 771 West End Avenue in the Riverside West End Historic District Extension 2. A Renaissance Revival style apartment building designed by Schwartz and Gross and built in 1914-15. The application is to establish a master plan governing the future installation of windows. This was last presented at the public hearing of November 12th, 2019, and no action was taken at that time. The commissioners had mixed responses to this application, with some supporting the proposal as presented with 1/1 double hung windows to match the current building standard, some supporting the 1/1 configuration but not the color, and others supporting the color but not the 1/1 configuration. A few could only support matching the historic condition, which the staff could approve. Because there was not enough support for any approach, the applicants were asked to review these options and consider modifying the proposal. While no changes have been made, the applicants have additional information to present in order to clarify their proposal. The applicant team will now present their response to those comments after we open the proceedings.
Okay, thank you, Corey. And Commissioner Bland, can I ask for a motion to open the proceedings?
So moved.
And Commissioner Gustafson, will you second that motion?
Second.
Okay, all in favor of opening the proceedings to allow the applicant to speak, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, all right, the applicant may speak.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you. We appreciate this opportunity to address these concerns on behalf of Board President Beth Pickens and Master Plan Committee Chair Michael Savino. We'd like to say that we're grateful for this opportunity.
And
what we had
Rick,
done-
can you just state, Rick, can you just state your name for the record?
Oh, sure. Rick Azar for 771 West End Avenue. I'm sorry, but we're lost. We've lost all of our notes on this with the Zoom window as it came in. Is there some way that we can minimize it on the screen for just a moment?
Rick, that's a setting on the user end.
Right.
So you can minimize maybe the gallery view or the speaker view in order to be able to view the presentation.
Okay. Yes, but it's not giving us, see, it's giving us a black background. It's not allowing us to see the other notes that we have on the screen.
The presentation is the PDF that was provided.
Yes, I understand that, but it's occupying our entire screen. It's not a portion of the screen. All right, I'm going to just continue with this and do the best I can. Thank you. Let me just go back here, and we have control of this now.
Correct.
Yeah, so if you just click on the screen, you can use the arrow keys to advance the slides.
Thank you. All right. The commissioners expressed some concerns regarding the configuration and the finish. There was also some comments regarding a realistic timeline for the replacement of windows overall. Here we have
Wow.
Here we have some photos of 771 West End Avenue at the far left. At the time of completion in 1915, we can see the original windows had a multi-pane upper sash with an articulated brick molding, all finished in white. Immediately to the right is the 1940 tax photo, where we see that the windows have been painted a dark color. We know that to be a dark hunter ground, a green. The immediate photograph to the right of there is the 1980 tax photo. And we can see a majority of the windows have been changed to a 1/1 double hung window. And at the far right, a photo from 2018 of 771 West End Avenue. Okay.
Rick, I can
I'm
advance
sorry,
this.
we're having problems with this.
If you tell me where you want to go in the presentation, I can.
Could we
advance the
go
slides
to page we go to page 4, please. Thank you. The commissioner's concerns concern the proposed window finish and configuration, and the applicant proposal seeks uniformity in the operation configuration of the finish. The proposal features return an original brick mold detail, 1/1 bronze window, maintains uniform fenestration, and the LPC precedents for this where the historic windows were not present at designation proposed 1/1 metal windows with profile brick molding and bronze finish that will be consistent with buildings of this type, style, and age. The proposed maintains a uniform fenestration. The design impetus from the beginning on this was to maintain a uniformity of the appearance of the building over time throughout the change. Next page, please. Thank you. Here we have a typical tripartite window, and we can see in the existing and proposed condition in the upper left-hand corner, what we've done in terms of proposing an articulated brick molding and articulated interim stack to replicate that at the beginning. Next page, please. There were three buildings that we'd like to cite here, three recent COFA issues by the commission. The first is 150 West 79th Street, Schwartz and Gross building. COFA issued in July of 2019. Original multi-pane double hung windows proposed was a 1/1 double hung aluminum replacement window. And the COFA was issued for the window master plan for the proposed window. In doing so, the commission found that this kept the fenestration uniform, that the historic windows were not present at designation, that proposed 1/1 double hung windows are in keeping with the historic in terms of operation and finish, and while not matching the historic multi-pane configuration, the proposed 1/1 configuration will be consistent with that of other buildings of this type, style, and age. Lastly, the configuration of the windows was historically a less prominent component of the building design. Therefore, the proposed 1/1 windows will not detract from the character of the building. And we felt that this was very much the same for 771 West End Avenue. Next page, please. In late November of 2017, a COFA was issued for window replacement as a quote unquote one-off in the building. But we think it's noteworthy to see what criteria the commission used to approve a window here. Again, it's a Schwartz and Gross building, a multi-pane wood double hung window was the original window, with the proposed 1/1 double hung aluminum replacement windows. And the COFA was issued for window replacement. And in doing so, the commission found that the historic multi-light dwelling windows were replaced prior to designation with 1/1 metal windows with a bronze finish. Proposed 1/1 double hung windows will recall the historic in terms of operation and details, and the proposed bronze finish will harmonize with the remaining windows throughout the building and is consistent with the historic finish on a building of this size and age. Lastly, proposed 1/1 configuration will match the remaining windows throughout the building, maintaining a uniformity of fenestration. Please turn the page. The last citation is 370 Riverside Drive. Again, a Schwartz and Gross building for a COFA issued in just this year in February. Again, original multi-pane double hung windows, proposed a 1/1 double hung aluminum replacement window, and the COFA was issued for a master plan on the proposed window. And in doing so, the commission found that this kept a uniform fenestration, that the historic windows were not present at designation, and that the proposed 1/1 double hung windows are in keeping with the historic in terms of operation and finish, and that the proposed profiled metal paneling will replicate the historic wood brick molds in terms of basic profiles and design. That while now matching the historic multi-pane configuration, the proposed 1/1 configuration will be consistent with that of the other buildings of this type, style, and age, and that the 1/1 double hung windows will allow a return to a more uniform fenestration pattern in a more timely manner than if a multi-pane configuration was required. So we can see a pattern of sensitivity on behalf of the commissioners regarding these window replacements. I think that's the last thing. Lastly, I would like to address a comment, and again, I apologize, we don't have any of my notes here. we'd like to address this notion of a replacement timeline for windows that were non-compliant, multi-pane windows with a light finish, and the sense that the that it would somehow change very quickly across the fenestration of the building. Almost 17% of the primary elevation windows have been changed in the years just up to designation, which is in 2010. Prior to that time, another 10% of the windows had been changed from 2000 to 2005. So we have almost 30% of these windows that have been changed. And in a best case scenario, they have a life of 20 to 30 years. And if we take into account the lifespan of the windows that are already there, this could be even more. So we wanted to put that out as well. I appreciate the opportunity and thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, do we have any questions of the applicant? Please raise your hand if you have any questions. All right, not seeing any questions. I'm just going to ask Rich. Rich, did we receive any written comments on this application?
We received no letters or testimony for this public meeting.
Okay, so we didn't receive anything. And so if there are no questions, we'll move right into our discussion. And, I think that the applicant presented in support of his request for a 1/1 window at this Schwartz and Gross building. He showed other Schwartz and Gross buildings where the commission has approved 1/1 to support that. But I think what that also shows us and reminds us is that the commission has long thought about these master plans for window replacement and has had varied approaches over the years. So as you know, we historically, the commission routinely approved 1/1 where the majority of the historic windows were removed prior to designation. And we approved 1/1 in master plans with the goal of getting a uniformity back in exchange of the historic configuration and better profiles and a better finish. And then more recently, we have started to, for many buildings, take a longer term view and for master plans, even where the majority of the windows have been removed and replaced prior to designation, have only approved master plans that allow the building that require the building to put in the original configuration, even if it's going to happen over a long term. And to deal with that inconsistency in recent years, the commission has really been thinking about how to be fair, how to be consistent, how to apply consistent standards. So we have started to think about the criteria in a little bit more of a nuanced way. And one of the things we've been thinking about is, does the building's design, style, and details, are they dependent on the original configuration, or does the building have enough detail, ornament that express the style, and therefore the window configuration is less important to the style? So the applicant presented these other Schwartz and Gross buildings that are of comparable ornament to where we've approved 1/1 in support of his case. So, sort of setting that up, I think we should go around and see where we end up on this one. So Commissioner Bland, can I start with you?
You may. I'm of the mind that this building is strong enough to exist with 1/1s. So I guess I'm in the camp that says, in this case at least, a consistency is more important than original 1915 configuration for the windows.
Okay, Commissioner Lutfi?
I agree.
Okay, Commissioner Jefferson?
I agree.
And Commissioner Gustafson?
I don't agree. I'm one of those people who takes that longer term view. Forever right or forever wrong, and that we when we do these one-off acceptances, as opposed to the master plans, we're digging a hole for ourselves. So I think it argues more for a change in our policy on the one-off acceptance.
Although
I think the longer term-
this is an application for a master plan.
I understand that.
Okay.
That's exactly why I think that we ought to take a longer term view.
Okay, and Commissioner Holford Smith.
Well, I'm a bit torn here. I think might have be on the side of Commissioner Gustafson. I'm taking the long view. I actually find the change in color to be more consistent than the configuration. I think going to the dark finish really changes the character. But I understand that it probably would take many decades for the change of color to, if we asked for it, to create a uniform facade. So
yeah, and one way that we've dealt with that in the past is where the applicants wanted a dark color to maintain some uniformity, and the building historically had a lighter color, is we've approved something that's kind of a medium tone so that there'd be some uniformity, but it wouldn't be so dark that it would contrast with the facade materials or call attention to itself. So that's something to think about. And in addition, in this case, as the applicant presented, we also are getting much improved profiles. Okay, so, but I think for now you're having reservations. And so we'll go to Commissioner Chapin.
In general, I agree with Commissioner Bland that when I'm looking at these window configurations, I am mostly trying to understand if there's been significant changes, how the window configurations relate to the building and whether the building, really has a good, appropriate appearance with the change in window. And I think I can approve in this case. I'm interested in Commissioner Holford Smith's remark about the color, because we could approve it with a lighter color and try to seek to bring that back, which may be faster over time than the issue of the multi-light window. So that's where I'm at.
Okay, all right, great. Commissioner Goldblum. Oops.
Oops.
All right.
All right. I remain of the camp with Commissioner Gustafson. And I think that the building had remarkably distinctive windows, and it is relatively simple in its masonry portion, so it would fall under the category of the design of the windows were significantly contributing to the overall architectural effect of the original building. So I would suggest, I would feel that this would not be an appropriate proposal.
Okay, and Commissioner Devonshire.
I don't consider this to be an appropriate approach.
Okay, and Commissioner Chen. All right.
I agree with Commissioner Chapin and Commissioner Bland. I do think that the Commissioner Ann did raise a good question about the color. So on that aspect, I do agree.
Okay, and I also in really trying to think about consistency and equity and the standards we apply, I do find that in this case, the building does have enough ornament to support the 1/1 configuration, and knowing also that, the 1/1 configuration was a building that was made at this time, and that it's, that it's consistent with our other approvals for similar buildings designed by Schwartz and Gross. But I would also encourage the applicants to explore the finish in consultation with the staff. So I think that we have just 6 for that. So Commissioner Chapin, would you make that motion? And we'll see. I think we have enough for a
Okay.
vote, but we'll see. Okay.
Hold on a minute. Let me get to the right page here. In the matter of a certificate of appropriateness, Borough of Manhattan, LPC 1940189771, West End Avenue, Riverside, West End Historic District Extension 2. A Renaissance Revival style apartment building designed by Schwartz and Gross and built in 1914-15. Application is to establish a master plan governing the future installation of windows. I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Riverside West Historic District Extension 2. I recommend approval, finding that all the historic multi-light windows, except for the windows at one stairwell bay in the deeply recessed entry court, were replaced with 1/1 double-hung aluminum windows with a brown finish prior to designation, resulting in a near uniform appearance. That the proposed windows will recall the historic windows in terms of operation and details, and will restore the profiled brick molds, which are currently concealed by flat panning. That the proposed 1/1 configuration will be in keeping with the configuration of historic windows often found at Renaissance Revival style buildings of this type and age, and that the design of the building's facades, featuring ornamental terracotta string courses, bracketed balconies, and cornices, can support a simplified window configuration. Okay. And the establishment of a master plan will support the uniformity of the building's fenestration over time. However, I recommend that the staff work with the applicant on the proposed color of the enamel finish so that it will harmonize both with the existing windows, but be consistent with other historic finishes found on buildings of this age and style.
Thank you. And Commissioner Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
Okay, and Rich, let's call the vote.
Okay. Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Devonshire,
No.
Commissioner Goldblum. Commissioner Goldblum,
No.
Commissioner Gustafson,
Nay.
Commissioner Holford Smith,
No.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Yes.
Okay, with 6 in favor and 4 opposed, the motion carries.
Okay, so that's approved. So we're going to break for lunch right now. We are a little behind schedule. We had 2 items for 2 applications for advisory reports in Central Park. So we will resume after lunch with those 2 items and then do our final item for the day, which is 4500 Arthur Kill Road. So we'll break right now and we will return at 1:15. And commissioners, just remember to turn your video camera off, and we will be muting everybody as well. And when you return, turn your camera back on. And for the public, we are going to be stopping the live stream. So when you come back, please go to if you want to continue watching, go to our home page on YouTube and resume the video from there so that you are actually in the live stream. Okay, thank you.